Thank you, Skip. I appreciate it, and I thank Nikolai for working with us to have us here at the Clinton School today. On behalf of Dr. Joe Thompson at the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement and our Invest Health team, who have been working about a year and a half to think about some unique approaches to community development to improve health. Our Invest Health team is made up of the City of Little Rock, Better Community Development, Southern Bank Corp, and the Arkansas Hunger Relief Alliance. And just a little bit about Invest Health before we begin. Little Rock was among 50 states chosen to participate in the Invest Health initiative, which is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And it charges cities to really think about the non-health aspects of an individual's health outcomes. To think about those socioeconomic factors that really impact health greatly. And this initiative brought together the community development industry, community development finance, hunger relief, folks in non-health sectors to develop new strategies for increasing and leveraging both public and private institutions and their investments to accelerate improvements in our neighborhoods, leading to better health. Now, as part of the initiative, we've done some surveying, we've done some community walkabouts, we've looked at the assets and the challenges of various communities around Little Rock, and particularly in the 12th Street area. And we rather organically, I would say, arrived at kind of this live local idea. To incentivize employees of large Little Rock institutions to live on the front step or the back door, whatever you want to call it, of where they work. We thought we were being extremely innovative in this approach, and frankly, incorporating some of the land bank assets through the Land Bank Commission. Ultimately, we hope to make it even more unique than what our other cities that we've looked at have done. But little did we know that our neighbor to the east, Memphis, was engaged in this type of work, and even more broadly, some commercial investment and other community development work, and that both Philadelphia and Detroit and some other cities around the nation had some great success in these types of efforts as well. So that brings me to our speakers today. I'm glad to have today with us Alex Feldman, who's Vice President of U3Advisors. He's got a background in architecture and urban planning. He's involved in both the advisory and development capacities of the firm, providing expertise in strategic planning, economic development, campus edge planning, and real estate strategy. He joined U3Advisors in 2009, and he served as a project manager for the firm's Midtown Detroit anchor strategy, where he helped lead the design and implementation of the $5 million Live Midtown Employee Housing Incentive Program, the Source Detroit Local Procurement Program, and the formation of the community development organization Midtown Detroit, Inc. Outside of Detroit, he's led the firm's engagement with a consortium of institutions in Lexington, Kentucky, to develop the vision for an anchor strategy, and has worked philanthropic, institutional, and community leaders in the lower Rio Grande Valley on a community engagement framework for the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. He's got a master's in architecture from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's in city design and social science from the London School of Economics. I'm also glad to have with us today who we engaged with in the Memphis area, Tommy Pacello, who's an attorney and city planner. He's the president of the Memphis Medical District Collaborative, which is a nonprofit community development organization focusing on the redevelopment of the Memphis Medical District, which is a 2.5 square mile area consisting of 8 major medical, educational, and research anchor institutions. Prior to working with the Memphis Collaborative, Tommy served as a member of Innovate Memphis. This nonprofit, funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, is charged with developing data-driven strategies to address the city's most pressing urban challenges. Much like what the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement does in the health space, he's looking at the urban planning space. In 2015, Tommy was named one of the top 40 real estate professionals under the age of 40 by Urban Land magazine and serves as the vice chair for the Memphis chapter of Urban Land Institute. He's also actively involved with the Congress for the New Urbanism and is a frequent national speaker on civic innovation and urban issues. I'm glad to have them both here for our program today, Eds and Meds, Engaging Anchor Institutions to Stabilize and Catalyze Communities. Please help me welcome them.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Alex Feldman with U3Advisors. It's a pleasure to be back in Little Rock. It's actually my second time here. I had the pleasure of visiting about a year and a half ago. Got to meet with the dean, tour the library, and see a little bit of downtown. So it's really wonderful to be back here, and I really enjoyed my visit last time. Today, as Craig mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about Eds and Meds and anchor institutions and how they can play a role in their community. And I thought I would just start. We're going to give you a little bit of an overview about our firm and the work that we've done in other cities, and then give you 3 case studies. The first will be in West Philadelphia, where I'm from, the University of Pennsylvania and the initiatives that they undertook there. And the second will be a project that we led in Midtown Detroit. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tommy to talk a little bit about the work that we've done in Memphis, not too far down the road. And then I think there'll be some time for questions afterwards. Just a little bit of background about U3Advisors. We're a 25-person advisory firm. We're based in Philadelphia with offices in New York City as well. And our focus is primarily around Eds and Meds and how they intersect with the communities and neighborhoods around them. So we think about how institutions and cities come together on their edges with their campuses and their real estate holdings. And the work that we've done, that we've led, really comes out of the legacy of our CEO, Omar Blake, who was for 10 years a senior administrator at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. He worked with Judith Rodin, who was the first female president of an Ivy League institution in between 1995 and approximately 2004 on a series of initiatives called the West Philadelphia Initiatives, which I'll talk a little bit about. But since leaving Penn and founding U3, we've worked around the country and to some extent around the world on how thinking about how anchor institutions, both hospitals, universities, and other types of nonprofit landowners can think about the interface of their holdings, their land holdings, their programs with the communities that they're in. We wanted to just give a little bit of background about how we think about anchor institutions. Often anchor institutions are thought of primarily through the lens of the missions that they provide, whether it's providing healthcare or education. But we think of them as economic engines. If you think about anchor institutions in the cities that they're in, they're often the largest employers in their cities. They attract students and medical residents. They purchase millions of dollars or sometimes more of goods and services. They conduct research. They generate arts and culture, and they also own a tremendous amount of real estate. Put all that together, you've got huge numbers of dollars coming in, people coming in, and all these things can have an impact on their community. And when you think about how an anchor institution interfaces with the community that they're in, there's often a divide. There's often sometimes a rift between a community and an anchor institution. We've seen that historically with town and gown issues around the world, around the country, and often that has to do with how institutions look at the community and how communities look at the institutions. Institutions themselves. They're often looking through what they produce, their outputs. So if you think about a university, they're looking at how they interface with a community through the graduates that they produce. If they're a hospital, they're thinking about the healthcare that they provide or the research that they conduct. But on the other edge of the spectrum, you've got communities that are aspiring for things that I think all of us aspire for: good schools, safe streets, amenities and services, retail, public spaces, vibrant, attractive neighborhoods, housing, healthcare choices, all of those things. I think when you drill down to really what communities are looking for, these are kind of the key ingredients. But when you try to connect really between those outputs and what an institution is providing, there's sort of a disconnect. What we try to do is flip the coin. and think about the inputs of what goes into an institution. So thinking about the faculty, the staff, the students, the visitors, those that are coming into the institution every day, and how, where they're living, where they're spending their dollars, how they're getting to work, are they driving, are they walking? All of those things have an impact on the communities that they're in, how often they go there, how much time they spend. Their goods and services, how much of their procurement spend are they spending within their community, within their city, within their region, and how much of that is leaking outside of that region? And then their real estate, what are they doing? If you think about institutional real estate and institutions in real estate in general, anchor institutions tend to buy a lot of real estate, mostly as a defensive mechanism to really control what's happening around them and ensure that nefarious uses or issues don't necessarily come into their campuses. And so it begs the question, what is that real estate doing other than being a land bank for the institution for the next 50 to 100 years? Can it be used for a more productive use? So when you think about the people, the dollars, and the place together, you can actually start to create outcomes. And that can be done through a variety of strategies, tools that we've used around the country to deploy the economic power of the institution, the enterprise of the institution, in a way that benefits both the institution and the community that they're in. So some of those tools include housing incentives. Can you attract more of your employees and students to live closer to your institution and actually be able to walk to work? Buy local. Can you actually purchase more of your goods and services from local businesses and have an impact on that economy? Hire local. Can you create job pipelines for neighborhood residents to institutional job opportunities? Thinking about their real estate, can you activate it in a way that actually creates a vibrant neighborhood around your campus? Thinking about the role of community development organizations and how they actually interface between the institution and the community. And then probably most importantly, schools. How can you actually think about the role of schools and the institution's role in local schools to actually create vibrant, safe, healthy neighborhoods? Anchor strategies, as we call them, those tools that we mentioned, are deployable in both strong markets and weak markets. If you think about a strong market, like for instance Nashville, where we're starting to do a little bit of work in North Nashville, which is home to a number of historically black colleges and universities. There's a threat of gentrification there, and there's this feeling that if we don't get in front of development, that development's going to wipe away the heritage of this neighborhood. So we're thinking about how an anchor strategy can actually be used in a way to make sure that the neighborhood remains affordable for institutional employees and remains affordable for neighborhood residents and keeps the marketplace in check. In weak markets, it's sort of the opposite. So in places like Detroit, in Memphis to some extent, how can that institutional economic enterprise actually be a catalyst for driving development? In a lot of cases, those in neighborhoods like Midtown Detroit or in West Philadelphia back in the 90s, no developer would come in. And so it really took the institution to take the lead and actually say, we're here, we want to see good things come in our neighborhood, and we're going to actually start to drive this conversation. So we've worked around the country and worked with a number of different institutions, and I think we've come away thinking that there's probably 3 or 4 different, in this case 4 different principles that I think make a successful anchor strategy. The first is that they're comprehensive, that they incorporate all practices of the institution, whether it's planning, their purchasing and their procurement offices, their HR, their personnel, and as well as their institutional policy. When you put all those things together, you can actually have a tremendous impact in your community. The second is that it's embedded within the institution's DNA, so that every decision that happens, whether it's at the CEO level or at the administration level or even at the staff level, they're thinking about the lens of community as well as the lens of the institution together. The third is that it's place-based, that it has a focused geography. An example of this is, or an example of how this hasn't worked in Philadelphia, Temple University implemented housing incentives, but they made them citywide. And the city of Philadelphia is 139 square miles. So when you think about where your staff and employers are living, that's not going to have an impact in your neighborhood if you have 139 square miles to play with. So thinking about a focused geography, thinking about the places that have the opportunity to create nodes of development and activity, and that's really where you can create a tremendous impact. And then finally, and probably most importantly, community partnerships. How do you engage with not only your city government, but also your neighboring anchor institutions, your philanthropy, and your local nonprofits, and your community members as well? This work does not happen on its own. It has, but it's much more successful when you throw in a number of other institutional partners into the mix. So with the sort of the theory behind anchor strategies, I thought I would just give a little bit of background about some of the work that we've done in some cities, and then I'll turn it over to Tommy to talk about the work that we are currently engaged with in Memphis. The first is the West Philadelphia Initiative. So just a show of hands, how many people have been to Philly or are familiar with West Philadelphia? Okay, great. How about those Eagles, right? Anyway, I thought I would. We get that like once in a 50-year period that I can brag about the Eagles. So anyway, the story of Penn and Philly is really a story that began probably in the 70s, probably before these pictures actually depict. And the university was, as part of its expansion, really worked with the federal government to through eminent domain, purchase a number of properties and blocks in the neighborhood, and historically black neighborhoods, and actually demolish properties and build super blocks of academic housing and classrooms, and as a result, it created a huge rift and divide between the neighborhood and the city, and this started to progress, and in the 90s, as the university kind of looked inward, the community kind of faced outward. The university itself purchased property around the edges of the campus, and without any other uses that they could think of, they just put parking lots there, essentially as a land banking tool. The community was divided away. The institution looked inward. Crime and blight kind of crept in between, and as a result, the neighborhood became unattractive and unsafe, and a place that students didn't necessarily want to spend time in. And this came to a head probably in 1994 when a student was murdered on the edges of the campus. At that time, Judith Rodin, who I mentioned earlier, had just become president. She had actually gone to Penn in the 70s and remembered the school when it was a vibrant place that was integrated with its neighborhood, and realized that this school was not what she remembered and really wasn't what the school could be. And so she took the initiative to say that without Penn leading and without the university taking an initiative, this neighborhood and this city I should say more importantly, the university's own reputation was at stake, but really the university's reputation was intrinsically tied to the community that was in. And so Penn took it upon itself to develop what they called the West Philadelphia Initiatives, which was a five-pronged strategy focused around making the neighborhood safe and secure, attracting new residents in, and really creating vibrant, walkable neighborhoods around their campus. Related to the safety and security issues, one of the first things that Penn did was they increased the patrol area of their Penn police, and so that it not only served the campus but also served the community around it. And on top of that, and not just thinking about kind of the traditional way of policing, Penn did other things. They created safety ambassadors, unarmed people that were had radios and connected to the police force, but really kind of like the eyes and ears on the street, walking around, walking people to their houses at night, making sure that people felt safe on the streets. Also helping with things like, if someone broke down, they would be able to jump a car, or help them get in if they locked their doors, or if they locked themselves out of their car. Those are the things that kind of help start the kind of feeling of safety and security. Penn also invested in lighting up and down streets. There were no street lights at the time, and I should have mentioned that the reason that Penn had to take all of this on was because the city of Philadelphia was nearly bankrupt at this time, and they really couldn't do anything to help the university, and so the university had to take the initiative to lead in this effort. Around attracting a year-round housing community, what had happened as Penn expanded and students had really started to creep into neighborhoods around the campus and take up really housing in sort of illegal rooming houses. More students living in there than code allowed. Couches on the porches. lots of issues around with neighbors, and that kind of pushing neighbors and residents and families out of the neighborhood as well. And so what Penn did was they did two things. They first started an aggressive push to build more student housing right at the edge of their campus to make it more attractive for students to live closer to campus. And then they started to acquire housing around the edges of the campus and actually incentivize their employees to move in. And I think about 1,000 or so employees took advantage of a mortgage guarantee program that Penn offered in the 90s and early 2000s. I mentioned the real estate and the parking lots. Another initiative, in addition to housing, is that Penn took it upon itself to actually develop retail and services and amenities, not just for the university, but also for the community themselves. One of the things that the neighborhood lacked, and many neighborhoods lack, is a grocery store. And so Penn decided they needed a grocery store and built a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week grocery store on the edge of their campus. Things like a cinema, things like their new bookstore, which was the first, I think, Barnes & Noble bookstore, university bookstore in the country, partnership bookstore that opened on the edge of their campus. These are the things that started to kind of align the interests of the university and the community that they were in. The fourth and maybe one of the most impressive was that Penn built a partnership school with the City of Philadelphia School District. So they invested in a new school building. It was a city-run school that Penn supplemented funding for, and they made it a neighborhood school. You did not have to be affiliated with the university to attend it. They just simply were able to, this was simply a tool that helped them attract more families to move back into the neighborhood. And then finally, the legacy of the 70s kind of had the campus turn inward. What Penn did physically was start to reintegrate their physical presence outward and actually open up back doors of their campus and make them front doors, making the entrance to the campus feel like it was open to anybody. These sort of moves helped really the university rethink its relationship, but also the community rethink its connectivity to the campus as well. And so today, if you were to visit West Philadelphia, you would see a thriving place. You would probably see more cranes in the sky than any other neighborhood in the city. And other anchor institutions which are in this neighborhood as well have followed suit. Drexel University, the hospitals, all of these institutions have realized the power of their real estate and their opportunity to work together to create a thriving place. And so the lessons from Penn, I think, have really have led this. This is almost like a snapshot of what you can see, 30 years later after this work has really started. A little bit sort of not as advanced as the Penn story, but sort of in its midlife story is the story of Detroit, Midtown Detroit specifically. And our firm was engaged here with the Kresge Foundation in 2009, right at the height of the Great Recession, to think about Midtown, which is a neighborhood that is home to three major anchor institutions: Wayne State University, Henry Ford Hospital, and Detroit Medical Center, all clustered in this sort of 2.5 square mile area known as Midtown, right along the Woodward Corridor. For us, it was an interesting challenge because we know that at the time there were several things going on. One was Detroit was in bankruptcy, and so really it did not have the resources to help out. The second was that while Penn was able to take this work on as a majorly, as a well-funded Ivy League institution, the question really came to mind: can this work, be successful? When you're thinking about public institutions and public hospitals, can the same synergy happen? And can multiple institutions do it together? So all of these things in mind, the first thing that we did was really wanted to understand kind of the data. And so you can see on the screen, there's collectively about 30,000 employees, 30,000 students that worked in the neighborhood. They hired about 3,000 people annually, and they collectively purchased about $1.2 billion in spend every year. Very robust numbers for these anchor institutions. But if you were to visit that neighborhood, you would see a very different place. In 2009, you'd see blight, you'd see crime issues, you'd see the appearance of not a place that you wanted to spend time in. And when you looked at the data, we actually found that there was tremendous leakage, economic leakage away from the neighborhood, from the institutions. Less than 10% of their employees lived in the neighborhood. Less than 5% of their goods and services were bought from Detroit-based businesses. And there was a tremendous gap between the income of the neighborhood and the income of the typical employee that worked at these institutions. And we know this because we collected a lot of data. The work that we do depends heavily on the institutional data that we start to look at. This map on the left, for instance, is a map that shows you every dot here represents an institutional employee or student that goes to one of those three institutions. And not only did we just look at where they lived, but we wanted to dissect them and understand how many of the nurses lived, close by versus the med residents. Where were MBA students living? Where were doctors living? And all that stuff helped us understand what the potential looked like. The same thing with the procurement spend as well. We were able to look at where the institutions were spending their dollars and how much of that was happening in the neighborhood and in the city and then in the region. So with all that data and with the institutions behind us and the foundation at the table, we were able to develop a strategy around live local, buy local, and hire local. The Live Local program really focused around home purchase incentives. The Buy Local program focused on an anchor procurement council that brought the institutions together. And then the Hire Local focused on creating a workforce development pipeline. So just quickly, Live Local offered up to $25,000 for new home buyers and $2,500 for new rentals in the neighborhood. Also, we wanted to serve existing renters as well and offered them $1,000 to retain their housing in the neighborhood. And we also worked with existing homeowners to provide home improvement grants. This was funded in part by the institutions and philanthropy. And in a period of time between 2009 and 2014, roughly, we've had about 1,000 participants in this program. What I think is really remarkable about this particular program is that it's incredibly diverse. Over 38% of the participants are African American. 37% earn less than $40,000. And it's also had a lasting impact. I believe about 77% of existing participants have retained their residence in the neighborhood, which I think speaks to their now interest in the neighborhood after going through this program. What's great about the diversity of this program is that it reflects what the anchor institutions, reflects the diversity of the institutions. The institutions employ everyone from janitors up to brain surgeons, and everyone was this program was open to anybody, and I think it really made everyone realize that there was an opportunity to live locally within the Midtown neighborhood. We also created a nonprofit community development organization called Midtown Detroit Inc. to really be the steward of all these programs and think about real estate development. There were two small organizations at the time working in the neighborhood, and we advocated that they should come together and form this new organization. MDI really had very little, I should say the predecessor programs really had very little funding from the anchors prior to its founding, and today that organization counts on about $1 million of anchor funding out of its about $3 million overall budget. It also works in real estate development. It was one of the organizations that was crucial in bringing Shinola to Detroit, which if you're familiar with Shinola, they build watches and bikes in Detroit. They were able to find space for that organization or for that company as it was setting up. And I think we were proud in 2013 when it won the ULI Global Award for Excellence. Midtown is coming back. It's not where West Philadelphia is at this point, but it's certainly in transition. It's safer, 40% reduction in crimes. Again, this has to do with Wayne State also being a partner at the table and increasing their police police patrol area. It's seen significant investment, not only from the institutions but also from private developers that have worked with MDI to secure financing and opportunities for development. And finally, it's seen a resurgence in housing. There's actually wait lists for housing in Midtown Detroit, not the narrative that you currently hear about Detroit typically. So we're proud of this effort, and I'm going to turn it over to Tommy to talk a little bit about how this work really came to play in Memphis back in 2014.
Good afternoon. It's great to be back here. One of the things, I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, but my wife is actually an alumni of this program in this school. She was in class 4, and so she was a little bit upset that she didn't get to come along with me on this trip. But she sends her best to all of her former teachers and colleagues that are here in Little Rock. As Alex talked to you a little bit, I think, about the big overarching theory of anchors, and really, I think, some about the nuances that it takes to do this work. And, this isn't a silver bullet. None of these programs are silver bullets in their own. Way I think about it, and I think the way that we like to think about it, is it's more just like a silver buckshot approach to neighborhood building, using a lot of different tactics. And one of the things that you'll see about Memphis, and also I think you'll see about Detroit, is that the challenges and the things that we're dealing with in these neighborhoods are incredibly complex. And that's why it takes a multifaceted approach. There isn't any single one thing that will fix a neighborhood or a district or a challenge that you have. In Memphis, the medical district sits right in between downtown Memphis and midtown Memphis. And downtown Memphis has been on this upward trajectory for several years. Midtown Memphis has been waking up more recently with the neighborhoods are starting to kind of click on all cylinders there. And then in between, what we found is we had this cluster of 8 large hospitals, community colleges, educational institutions, research institutions that were sitting right around this middle part of the city. And this district around them, and there's some big names. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is a big one, Methodist Hospital System, Baptist Hospital System, Le Bonheur, which is an internationally known children's hospital, University of Tennessee, our flagship medical school is there for the University of Tennessee system, as well as other institutions. There's a tale of two cities in a way, because you have these institutions, and then you have what's kind of happening in the neighborhoods that are between and around those campuses. And in between and around those campuses, what we see is that today there's 9,500 people that are living there. Large percentage of that population is living below the poverty line, about 45%. We also see that in an eds and meds district, we have a relatively low educational attainment level, and we also see that we have a lot of high renter population, very low home ownership population. Just on the other side, and that's sort of in the non-bright color kind of areas, on the other side on what's happening on the campuses is this number, right? You have 8 institutions, they have 24,000 employees and students, they have about $3 billion operating budget, about $3.5 billion in planned capital investments. They've got about 250 acres of land, same pattern that Alex mentioned, where they just started to acquire land almost defensively over the years. And they also have got, of that operating budget, about $1.2 billion in purchasing. So lots of wealth, lots of activity happening on the campuses, a few feet off of campus, not so much. And so this question is, how do you begin to leverage what's happening on the campuses to strengthen those communities that are between and around the campuses? So, before I get into the tactics of how, just a little bit more understanding, again, the institutions owned about 50% of the property in the district are owned either by those 8 institutions or other similar types of institutions, churches, things of that nature. Parking, really one of the things that we see is that as these institutions in Memphis were acquiring property and they would buy it, they may not want to own a small house or something, so they would tear it down and put a surface parking lot there. And this is something that started in the 60s. I would mention, I forgot to mention, in 1970 there were 30,000 people that lived in this boundary. So huge out-migration out of this neighborhood. It happened all over the city of Memphis as we dealt with issues of sprawl, right? People moving out of the core of the city to the suburban edge, and now the people are moving back in. So as they were moving out, that's what the institutions started to buy the property that was in the district around their campuses, again, defensively. So the housing that's there became very fractured, and it became a little bit clustered to the north and a little bit clustered to the south, but a lot of the housing went away. And again, this is going back 30, 40 years, and so it's like, how do we begin to put this stuff back together? The built environment responds when you start to make those kinds of policy decisions, right? And so the result is that the district becomes very auto-oriented, becomes lots of drive-throughs, lots of gates, lots of disinvestment sort of in the campuses. And for the institution's point of view, that was not an attractive look or a way to recruit the best and the brightest, but also to offer their employees, which make up the entire socioeconomic spectrum of our city, give them options to live close to where they work, and that was really important to our institutions. We started to see a lot of potential in the district also. Again, the employees, not many of them were living in the district, but we saw that they were living very close by. And so that provides opportunities to have them move, even closer into the district, because they're already showing a preference to live close to the campus. There just are not any options. Secondly, there's also potential in the fact that they hire 2,500 employees each year, or start new jobs. 1,300 new students start taking classes each year. They're expanding the new growth of the employees based on the growth of these campuses by about 5,000 people over the next 5 years. So a lot of new jobs coming in to the district. Also, Alex mentioned the hiring. There's a huge untapped demand for goods and services that the institutions are buying. There's $1.2 billion in purchasing. Some of those, there's going to be like a medical device that you can only get somewhere in Wisconsin or something. But there's a lot of stuff that you could get from the local economy that we weren't catching. In fact, we calculated about $350 million of goods and services could be being bought in Memphis, of which only 50 million were being bought today. And so there's a huge opportunity, and we actually even identified the industry segments of where you could capture those additional income and have that local multiplier effect to the local contracting. And then again, institutionally owned land. About 110 acres of vacant land or surface parking lots are owned by our partners. Huge opportunity for infill development on those lots. So how do you do it? This is kind of the silver buckshot and give you a sense of kind of what that looks like. The first is, almost borrowing a page out of the playbook in Detroit, was to have an intermediary. That Midtown Detroit Inc. served as that intermediary in Detroit, and here it's the Memphis Medical District Collaborative, the organization that I'm fortunate enough to run. And then we have the anchor programs and the district planning. But the Medical District Collaborative functions a little bit like a bid. So in addition to managing the anchor programs, which I'll talk about in just a second, and at a very high level, we also do a lot of public space work. We do a lot of safety security work. We do a lot of the programming and marketing in the district, the community development work in the district. So I'm just going to quickly kind of give you a sense of what that stuff looks like. The public space is critical because much in a similar manner to where Philly found itself, Memphis city government doesn't have a lot of slack within its budget to provide additional goods and services like a weed abatement program on the sidewalks or to empty additional trash cans that are out in the neighborhoods and things like that. So we end up needing to provide a lot of that sort of basic, brilliant on the basic type level of services of clean and green infrastructure. We have an ambassador program, like Alex mentioned, that are 10 guys that are out in the streets on a regular basis. They're picking up litter. They're getting graffiti off the light poles or the sides of buildings. They're emptying the public trash cans. But they also allow us to do things like this Streetscape Improvements. This is right before the landscaping went in, so it's a relatively new one. But an example of kind of what you'll see. This is we use epoxy gravel and planters. We worked with the city to identify about 25 to 30 intersections that needed some enhancement. And what you'll notice is that it doesn't take much. This is not a $2 million fix. This is like the $200,000 solution to this intersection. And that making that small improvement with public art, with additional enhancements to the intersection, it shows that somebody's paying attention to this area. And just by making that investment, we're starting to see investments in the real estate around it. Because it's like, wow, so something's going on here. This is sort of an investment zone. I can tell that we're telegraphing out or signaling to the private sector where our investments are headed and what we're paying attention to, and now we're starting to see the real estate fall into place. Safety security is a big deal in Memphis, following a page off of Penn also, of connecting the private security teams that the institutions all hire, along with the 4 police departments that we have in Memphis. This is Maureen Rush. She's been working closely with our security teams to kind of help them understand how did they do this in Penn and West Philly, and what are the lessons that can be learned there, especially around coordination. Again, in Philly, it was the Penn Police, the Philly Police, the Drexel Police, the SEPTA Police, the private security teams, all of that. We have a similar scenario in Memphis, and it starts with the first Tuesday of every month, getting everybody in the room together. First Tuesday, 2 o'clock, we talk about clear channels of communication, using data to show us where crime hotspots are, and then also thinking about the environmental barriers to perceptions of safety and things of that nature. programming and marketing, doing events in the district, connecting those employees, those 24,000 employees and students, with the people that are living in the neighborhoods and the owners of the small businesses around the campuses is a really critical piece. One of the things that we do is we produce our own programs and events, but we also downstream a lot of them and encourage making small grants to neighborhood groups to do a concert series. But an event that we like that we're doing regularly right now is an event called Freewheel. And just to give you a sense of the type of things that we look to program, this is a slow bike ride. And so the logo is a snail. It's supposed to be very unintimidating, scrubs to spandex, kind of come as you are kind of thing. We'll get 60 to 80 people on Wednesday nights out in front of this little brewery in the neighborhood. And the whole point is to start each ride with some intentional learning objective, like we're going to go tour Victorian Village and learn about the history of the neighborhood while we're riding on bikes. And it's employees, it's residents, it's other cyclists from the city. And what we find is that people learn how close this stuff actually is. And you're giving them a new option that they typically wouldn't think about if they're just in their car every day, going to and from work. And they realize, I really can bike from this location to this location. We also have a bike fleet that you can borrow bikes out, these vintage bikes that we work with. Community development is a really big part as well. So it's business development, it's doing small area planning, it's transportation mobility issues in the district. Again, sort of the no silver bullet, you got to do it all. Parking management in the district. Here's a few ideas or a few things that we've been able to champion. One is we have a retail incubator program. It's called Edge Alley. That is a coffee shop that has a bunch of micro retail bays in it. And we use it to provide small entrepreneurs that are interested in opening in the neighborhood a chance to decant, to test their business model out before they invest in the large scale investment of signing a 5-year commercial lease and taking out a second mortgage on their house, for instance. And they're able to get in there on a short-term basis and see what works and what doesn't work in sort of a safe way. They're also matched with a lot of technical expertise, somebody that can help them set up their QuickBooks, teaches them about visual merchandising, things of that nature. We have a pre-development grant up to $5,000 to take your sort of back of barroom napkin idea for real estate development or business concept and turn it into a PowerPoint product. Just so that you're taking it to that next stage. Because in our view, if I get more people, more entrepreneurs, more real estate developers walking around with PowerPoint projects for the district, then more projects are inherently going to happen in the district. And that's really easy, inexpensive incentive dollars that we can add to the mix. Another thing that we do a lot of work with is we work with property owners that, we find that a lot of small developers end up owning multifamily buildings that they don't quite know what to do with. Well, we can offer this design assistance and almost hold their hand and almost serve as their Sherpa to get the right type of development to happen the redevelopment to happen in these apartment buildings and make sure that they're pricing them the right way. They're not at the top end of the real estate spectrum, but they're meeting the demands of the institution's employees. The anchor programs, live local, buy local, hire local. We're about a year into our programs. Alex gave you, I think, went pretty deep on them, so I'm just going to give you a highlight of kind of where we are on each. We've had in the first year of Live Local, we had about 215 applicants come through the Live Local program. 4 of our 8 institutions are participating in that program. About 60% of the applicants are making $40,000 or less. About 60% of them are African American in population. And what we're realizing now is that we desperately need additional supply. The demand is now ramping up, and now the supply side's starting to come on. So we need additional multifamily and single-family housing for sale. Buy local, the idea was that $50 million to increase the amount that we're spending with the local businesses. In Memphis, our focus is very strongly on local minority and women-owned businesses. We've shifted in our first year about $1.6 million in contracts towards local minority and women-owned businesses. Hire local is a similar sort of hiring from the surrounding neighborhoods around the district. We have about 3,100 support service jobs that we're going to need to be filled over the next 5 years. And if one institution is looking ahead at their projections over the next 5 years and says, oh, I might need 25 med techs, for instance. Well, I'll just go find 25 med techs if I'm that one institution. But if I look collectively across our institutions and we see that we're going to need 150 med techs, that's something that I can build a program around and begin to connect residents from the neighborhoods around the district into the workforce development experts that do such a good job of doing the job training for those positions. And what the institutions are doing is beginning to make some guarantees on certain number of jobs that they will hire out of this program. So that's how that's working with us. Our higher local, all of these, the buy local and the higher local are councils. That's either the purchasing head or the HR head, and they're meeting on a monthly basis as they're monitoring these programs. But what we see as our job is to convene and to backstop and fill any holes that need to be filled. We're just almost creating a marketplace. We connect the people that cultivate small businesses with the purchasers. We convene and cultivate the workforce developers with the hiring experts at the institutions. So that's our job. We don't want to pile on. We don't want to do anything that's already being done by somebody else. The last thing I'm going to talk about real briefly is the real estate side, just to give you a sense of what's going on there. I strongly, strongly encourage you to invest in a really good third-party real estate analysis on retail and on residential, and keep them updated. It's like the highest return on investment for the for an intermediary such as ours is to be able to go out with hard numbers and say this is what the demand is, and this is what the price point ought to be. For our retail side, what we found is that if you look at the institutional demand that most people don't look at, if you look at the institutional demand, we can support an additional almost 200,000 square feet of retail spread across multiple different industry categories. On the residential side, we could support between 2,000 and 2,600 new residential units in our district over the next 5 years. About 320 to 389 rental units a year could be absorbed. And one thing I want to point out is this number here. It's really important when you do this work to think about your entire spectrum. AMI is area median income. In Memphis, our AMI, or area median income, is about $60,000 for a family of four. And because our institutions, and to Alex's point earlier, their hiring makes up the entire socioeconomic spectrum, we need to make sure that we're providing affordable housing for everyone on that socioeconomic spectrum. And so the trick is that 80% and above AMI, these numbers here, the market generally is going to take care of that. 30% and below AMI is really hard to deal with. That's almost like a public housing. This space in between, the 30% to 80% of AMI, of area median income, it really takes a strong nonprofit developer. It takes an advocate or someone who's using local incentive tools, whether it's pilots or tax increment financing or whatever it is, to be able to provide quality, affordable housing that is in and around these campuses. So I just want to make that point. One thing that I've seen in Memphis that's happened over the past year and a half that we've been going is that the institutions, by coming out and becoming more and more public about their investments and doing it in a coordinated way, it's had a stabilizing effect in the market. And so these are the institutionally led projects that we're seeing. Many of the campuses are engaged in this spend. This is the $3.5 billion. This is the community development works, or the district works that are either announced or recently completed. You have Crosstown Concourse, which is a 2 million square foot redevelopment of Old Sears Distribution Center. You have a affordable housing, a mixed use, mixed income kind of neighborhood using tax increment financing here, a Hope 6 project, lots of public streetscape projects and things of that nature. These are the projects that we're going to be working on for the next 10 years. And where the neighborhood infill is going to be is the stuff in the red. So what do some of those look like? Some of it is working with the institutions on their excess parking lots. So we have 2 big institutions that have RFPs either out or recently closed. One is the University of Tennessee and the other is SCO. Both of these sites are redeveloping this land for mixed-use multifamily housing projects. So they are not using it and they will be open to anybody in the district. This is not a UT project. This is not a Southern College of Optometry project. It's just they're putting their land into the deal. Another project that's we've seen come online that we're really excited about is the redevelopment of an old historic Wonder Bread bakery and some of the surrounding parcels. This is kind of what the redevelopment looks like. Phase 1 is this side right here. This will be a phase 2. It's about a $73 million project. One of the things that we played a role in doing with U3Advisors was taking this building, that's a 30,000 square foot building, and putting together the visioning for the building and what it could be, and then lining up those tenants. Because we find that we serve that front door role for the district. A lot of people come in our door and say, hey, I'm opening an office, I'm interested in the medical district, can you connect me to? And so we see those front doors and we can connect them with we see those people come in the front door, we connect them with the developer. So painting that vision for what the building could be ends up being a role. This is the bakery across the street and the cycle shop and how they'll fit in together. This building will be online in 6 months. This one's out probably 2 years. They just started construction on it. Missing middle housing is a product that is not your single-family housing, not your multifamily housing. It provides the answer for a lot of our that 30 to 80% AMI in our minds, and a lot of the work that we're doing. We've been doing a lot of work with the Kresge Foundation and a host of other partners around our emerging developer workshop, getting our small developers, those people that maybe you're a plumber and you have got a couple of trucks and you're working for fee, but you want to start building a little wealth. Well, how do you demystify that missing middle housing? How do you demystify how a building makes money and get more people doing small scale infill redevelopment? That will provide us answers to our housing needs and also some of our affordability issues. And then, again, in the effort at not piling on, we layer on with a lot of other groups that are out there to provide different incentives. Some of them are what we call pilots, payment in lieu of taxes. Some are TIFs. Some are low-interest loan funds. We have our own capital fund. But beginning to layer and communicate what the various tools and incentives can be for investing in the district. And I think with that, we're ready to move on to Q&A. So thank you all.
Questions? Okay, we got a few minutes for questions. Yes, Professor Ernst, right here.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for what you guys are doing. Really a couple of questions and observations. One, I guess I'd like for you to talk about the role of anchor institutions relative to this ancient notion of paideia. That is to say, how do we create the educative city? And I think about anchor institutions as complementing, not competing with formal public schools, but imagine creating sort of creative and innovative out-of-school space, Boston, Providence, Nashville, and the role of these anchor institutions in this. And there was a little bit of a silence in that in your presentation. And the other silence that I worry a little about is sort of the silence of youth voice. Where is the role of young people? And then thinking creatively about these relationships with partner schools in K-12 education.
Sure. Do you want to talk?
Yeah, I can.
School education piece, and I'll talk about kids.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and actually one that I haven't heard before. So it's great to kind of have that brought up. I would say that the reason that there may have been silence on that issue is because when we think about an institution, we try to the mission of an institution, right, is if it's a university, it's to educate. If it's a hospital, it's to provide healthcare and community services. That work is being driven home by the institution's mission, and there are programs within an institution that connects that institutional mission to community services or community benefit or community programs. At Penn, there were programs that really helped, that did everything by connecting the educational department at the school to to tutoring and local organizations to help with youth education, things like that. Where we were silent is maybe because we look at the other side of the coin and start to think about the enterprise of the institution, which is typically when we've worked with anchors, they strive to connect through their academic programs or their healthcare programs. We look at it through their economic activity and their enterprise. So it's not that we're trying to silence that side or say that side is doing something different. Really, actually, the best examples of those are when those can come together. And I think a good example of that, Tommy, is with the Freewheel program. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a cool idea of how you've actually layered educational opportunities on top of community development.
Yeah, I can address that. So one of the things I didn't touch on in Freewheel is that vintage bike fleet that we have. We partnered with a program called the Carpenter Street Bike Shop. And the Carpenter Street Bike Shop works with kids, teaching them how to work on bikes, and then places the kids in bike shops around the city. And so we basically partner with them. They manage all the bike fleet. And so we have kids that are from the area around there working on the bikes. One thing I want to follow up to your question about the youth voice, I'm going to answer that a little bit more in the sense of community engagement, because that's a really critical piece, and I didn't really touch on that. The medical district's got about eight or nine neighborhoods, depending on how you slice it, that make up the medical district. And what we found in our scan of those neighborhoods is that they vary as far as the level of sophistication of their community organizing, their neighborhood voice. And one of the things that was important to us was to have that authentic resident voice have a seat at the table. So we have community groups that sit on, from the neighborhood groups sit on our board, and they have the same vote as the CEOs of the hospitals do. But to that point, we also realized that, you know what, the different levels of sophistication of those resident groups, we have to work with them to say that today you may have one neighborhood organization that really only has like a 30% penetration to the neighborhood. Some of them have 70 or 80%, and they really do speak for the neighborhood. So we have to work at the fine-grained grassroots level to make better grass top leaders, if that makes sense. And then we serve as that intermediary between the resident groups and the institutions.
Any other
The
questions?
kids are a big part of that.
Any other questions? Well, let's thank Tommy and Alex, and let's also thank Joe and Craig and everybody at ACI for this. Senator Bond, glad you're here. Mayor Stodela, glad you're here. And thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.